Mr. Speaker.
Present us, O Lord, in all our doings with thy most gracious favor, and further us with thy continued help, that in all our works begun, continued, and ended in thee, we may glorify thy holy name, and finally, by thy mercy, attain everlasting life. Amen. I would like to introduce Mr. Rob Park as our newest table officer. For the last 4 sessions, he has been at the clerk's table participating in a career development program. Rob has had the opportunity to learn skills that will serve him well in his new table officer role. Please join me in formally recognizing Rob as our newest clerk at the table. I would like to advise members that I have received the 2022 Saskatchewan Constituency Boundaries Commission final report and am now tabling it. Introduction of guests. I recognize the Minister of Intergovernmental Affairs, Government Relations.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to you and through you and to the rest of the Assembly, I want to introduce 29 grade 12 students from the Greenall High School, Mr. Speaker, just east of the city in Balgony. They are accompanied by their teacher, Melissa Marley. I will be meeting with them for a picture and answer any questions they may have after the introductions and after sessions. So welcome to the grade 12s from Greenall. Thank you.
I recognize the Minister of Social Services.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. In your gallery this morning, we have 2 folks who do great work in our communities. Been able to meet many great people in my time as a minister, those that receive services, but those that provide those services as well. We have Amy McNeil, Executive Director, SARC, and Jim Morrison is the Board Chair, SARC. That's an umbrella organization representing CBOs who do great work, as I mentioned, in our province. They were here for the SARC Awards last night, which several MLAs attended. It's a pleasure to be there, and it's a pleasure to see them in the Assembly. Please help me welcome them.
Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I want to, of course, join with the minister opposite in welcoming Amy McNeil, Executive Director of SARC, and Jim Morrison, President of the Board. As members of this House know, SARC represents approximately 100 community-based organizations across the province. Many of those organizations, of course, are in the disability support sector. They do advocacy, education, employment and training. They do incredible work, and what a pleasure it was to attend the SARC Awards last night together with the minister and the member from Douglas Park, and how nice to see them in the House today, Mr. Speaker, which of course is the end of Disability Employment Awareness Month. So I want to commend Amy and Jim for the absolutely crucial work that they continue to do in leading this organization. Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Parks, Culture and Sport.
Very much, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to introduce a special guest who is seated in your gallery. We are lucky to be joined today by the award-winning producer, George Sirigiannis, from Overtime Studios of Swift Current. I recently met George at a sold-out premiere of his very successful documentary, Wild Prairie Man. George has produced and directed a number of projects and is a true example of the talent we have right here in Saskatchewan. Thank you, George, for showcasing the beauty of our province on the world stage.
Great.
Recognize the Minister of Advanced Education.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, to you and through you to all members of the Assembly in your gallery, I'm pleased to stand and introduce Karsten Hendrickson and his partner, Martin Sanchez, who are sitting, as I say, in your gallery. Give us a wave. Thanks very much, guys. Mr. Speaker, I'm happy to announce that Karsten is the newly appointed President and CEO of Northlands College. Karsten comes to us with a wealth of knowledge from his previous roles in Northern Alberta, British Columbia, and the Yukon. Most recently, he led the startup for the Centre of Indigenous Health Leadership in British Columbia. Mr. Speaker, as everyone in the Assembly knows, our regional colleges play an important part in helping provide the education our students need so they can contribute to Saskatchewan's strong economy. I'd like to thank Karsten for his dedication and leadership to the students at Northlands, and I look forward to working with him and moving the interests of those students forward, Mr. Speaker. So I'd like to ask everyone in the gallery to please welcome Karsten and Martin to their legislative assembly.
Recognize a member from Saskatoon University.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'd like to echo the minister's welcome to you both. Karsten and Martin, thank you for being here. As our critic for advanced education, on behalf of the official opposition, we're so glad to see you here, and thank you for your important work on behalf of post-secondary students in our province.
You're here.
Recognize the Minister of Corrections and Policing.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. To you and through you and to all members of this Assembly, I'd like to introduce 26 grade 7 students from W.S. Harlock School right here in Regina. They're accompanied by their teacher, Ms. Shelby Bell, and I so look forward to meeting with you after question period today. I'm sure you'll have lots of great questions. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize a member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. While we're on the topic of students, I would be remiss if I forgot to introduce Sadie Hastings and Jaden Ducharme, who are seated in the gallery to the east. They are human justice students who are doing their practicum in my office, and you'll be seeing them throughout the session from time to time. They're an incredible bunch, very inquisitive, very passionate about the sector, and it's just been a real pleasure to work with them. So I want to welcome them to their legislature.
Presenting petitions. I recognize the member from Saskatoon Fairview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to present a petition calling on the Government of Saskatchewan to act on a suicide prevention strategy. Yesterday, we heard from concerned citizens on the West Lawn about the desperate need for mental health services in our province. It's been more than 2 years since the passing of the Suicide Prevention Act, and we've urged government to create a bipartisan committee to put their words into action. It's unacceptable that suicide rates for Indigenous people in Saskatchewan are 4 times higher than non-Indigenous people, and that Northern Saskatchewan continues to experience high levels of suicide and overdose deaths. It's past time to act. I'll read the prayer. We, in the prayer that reads as follows, respectfully request that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan call on the Government of Saskatchewan to immediately work with community organizations and leaders in the North to develop Saskatchewan's suicide prevention strategy. This petition today is signed by individuals from Saskatoon, Mr. Speaker. I do so present.
Statements by members. I recognize the member from Saskatoon-Meewasin.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I am so honored to stand in this chamber today as the member for Saskatoon-Meewasin. It has been an amazing journey, and I owe it all to my constituents for their trust and sharing our vision. Mr. Speaker, if it weren't for the constituents of Saskatoon-Meewasin, I wouldn't be here today. As many in this chamber know well, a campaign is a lot of work, but meeting the people of Saskatoon-Meewasin every day on the doorstep, hearing their struggles and want for change motivated me to keep going.
Hear, hear.
They inspired me to push harder, work harder, and ensure that their voices are heard in this building. And Mr. Speaker, the people of Meewasin sent a clear message.
Hear, hear.
The Sask Party is failing Saskatchewan people.
Yep.
Countless families are going without a doctor.
Shame.
Healthcare workers and our youth leaving the province in droves. And more families are struggling to keep food on the table and a roof over their head.
That's right.
If this by-election taught this tired government anything, it should be that playing to their base and their dismal distraction techniques aren't working.
Hear, hear.
Saskatchewan people are watching. They know better, Mr. Speaker, and frankly, they deserve better.
Hear, hear.
I owe all my thanks to the people of Meewasin. I won't let you down.
Hear, hear.
Recognize the member from Kenora-Pelly.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm very proud to announce that the third humanitarian flight carrying displaced Ukrainians arrived safely into Regina on Tuesday. Mr. Speaker, I had the privilege to be there and welcome 236 Ukrainians as they stepped off the plane and onto Saskatchewan soil. Upon the arrival, the newcomers were provided with all supports possible through the Settlement Reception Centre, or one-stop shopping. Mr. Speaker, this includes access to information about health cards, assistance in setting up bank accounts, house support, education, income assistance, and more. More than 2,300 Ukrainians have safely and securely landed in Saskatchewan. My own community of Kenora has already been home to 5 different displaced Ukrainian families, all of whom are employed and housed. Through you, Mr. Speaker, on behalf of the government of Saskatchewan, I'd like to extend a heartfelt welcome to all the Ukrainians. This wouldn't have been possible without the generosity of the Saskatchewan people. I'd also like to ask all the members of the Legislative Assembly to join me in thanking the Saskatchewan people for their unwavering support and generosity to the sisters and brothers of Ukraine. Your efforts have gone a long way in ensuring that everyone who comes to Saskatchewan fleeing violence is welcomed and well taken care of, because that's what we do when you're from Saskatchewan. Thank you. Slava Ukraine.
Recognize the member from Regina Elphinstone Centre.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It was a privilege to attend the SARC Awards last night, together with the Minister and the member from Douglas Park, an incredible showcasing of the community SARC serves and the crucial work of its member organizations. Many happy tears were shed. SARC represents approximately 100 CBOs, and member organizations are among the largest employers in rural communities. Despite the happy, celebratory tone of last night's event, folks were keen to share the challenges they're facing in the disability support sector. Despite frontline staff draw skills from multiple other professions, despite providing essential services to some of the most vulnerable, they feel devalued in pay, in benefits, and in recognition of the very real challenges of their jobs. Staff turnover in the disability sector is now over 30%. That's up from last year, which was up from the year before. On the heels of COVID and now with the cost of living crisis, folks are leaving the sector at unsustainable rates. One member told me last night that she had a long-time employee leave to become a continuing care aide. She could no longer pay her bills, and she just wanted to be able to afford fruits and vegetables at the grocery store. The sector badly needs a workforce strategy and the support of this government. A revolving door of care isn't just suboptimal, it's dangerous. And ultimately, it's people living with disability that are paying the highest price. So with that, I would ask all members to join me in committing into words and action to support the crucial work of SARC members and the entire disability support sector. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Recognize the member from Prince Albert Northcote.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. October 22nd to 29th is Nursing Week in Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, nurses form the backbone of any strong healthcare system, and a career in nursing is vast and very fulfilling. This government is proud of the incredible work being done across the province by our nurses and other healthcare professionals. Saskatchewan has seen some great milestones in nursing this year. In April, Northwest College announced a 91% pass rate on their National Psychiatric Nursing Exam. This means Northwest will have more psychiatric nurses licensed and ready to practice in Saskatchewan. In September, this government released its action plan to recruit, train and retrain more nurses to meet our growing population needs. Mr. Speaker, nurses are the heart of healthcare, and our province is privileged to have nurses to support us during our most vulnerable moments throughout our lives. Florence Nightingale, the founder of modern nursing, said, "Nursing is a progressive art, such that to stand still is to go backwards." Mr. Speaker, I ask all members to join me in recognizing Nursing Week in Saskatchewan and thanking all nurses for the work they do propelling our province forward. Thank you.
Hear, hear, hear. Recognize a member from Saskatoon Westview.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. October is Foster Families Month in Saskatchewan. Mr. Speaker, Foster Families Month provides us the opportunity to shine a light on the many contributions of foster parents across the province. Recently, I had the opportunity to attend an event in Saskatoon recognizing some of those foster parents. We are so fortunate to have more than 450 foster families across Saskatchewan. These foster families provide children and youth with a safe, loving home, no matter how long or short their stay. The incredible partners at the Saskatchewan Foster Families Association support these families through offering training and support. The Saskatchewan Foster Families Association also supports our government's efforts to increase the number of approved foster homes across the province. Mr. Speaker, our government is incredibly grateful to the hundreds of foster families who open their hearts and homes during these times of families in crisis. Fred Rogers, also known by his stage name as Mr. Rogers, once said, "Anyone who does anything to help a child in his life is a hero." Mr. Speaker, Faith Top is one of those heroes. As a foster parent, Faith has shared her heart and home for 47 incredible years. I would also like to thank Deb Davies, Executive Director of the Saskatchewan Foster Families Association, who is here today with us, and thank her for her remarkable work that she has done. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Hear, hear. Recognize the member from Swift Current.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise today to highlight the incredible work of cinematographer and director George Sugrianis from Overtime Communications Studios and his co-producer Carol Andrews from Swift Current on the documentary Wild Prairie Man. Wild Prairie Man centers around photographer James Page, who is determined to capture the images of the exotic and stunning lands of Grasslands National Park. George followed James as he documented the beauty of the park through all 4 seasons. During a recent interview with journalist Matthew Liebenberg about what he hopes the impact of his film will be, George said, quote, "Locally, I would hope it would give people a greater appreciation for what's actually here. But then on a larger stage, I hope it does spotlight that we do have stories to tell here." Mr. Speaker, it's safe to say that George has surpassed his goal. On top of winning Best Nature Wildlife Film at the Cannes World Film Festival in February, it recently won the Best International Feature Documentary at the Västerås Film Festival in Sweden. This is one of the most prestigious events in Northern Europe, featuring films from around the globe. Locally, there have been screenings of Wild Prairie Man across the province, from Val-Marie to Saskatoon, including the recent premiere at the Kramer IMAX Theatre here in Regina just this last week to a full house. Congratulations to George and Carol. Let's continue to build upon this momentum.
Hear, hear. Recognize the member from Melville Saltcoats.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Throughout the world, we're hearing Saskatchewan is being considered best in class in a number of key economic indicators. Tim Gitzel perhaps said it best in a recent Toronto Star article: Saskatchewan could perhaps be the savior of the world. And here are some numbers that really back that up. Building construction investment is up 87.1% in Saskatchewan compared to August 2021, ranking first among the provinces in percent change. In August, we ranked first among provinces in non-residential construction, up 34% from last year. Saskatchewan has the lowest unemployment rate in any jurisdiction in Canada, currently at 4.1%, down from 6.4% last year. With over 143,000 small businesses in the province, we have the second highest per capita rate in the country. We had the highest change in wholesale trade for the month of August, year over year, up a staggering 73.7%, best in the country. Manufacturing sales up 28.9% year-over-year, second best in the country. There is a 54.7% increase in merchandise exports from last year, first in the country. In 2021, Saskatchewan set a record with $17.5 billion in agri-food exports, producing 98% of Canada's lentils and 80% of the national durum crop. About a third of the Canadian ag biotech sector is located here in Saskatchewan and is helping us to reach our growth plan goals. Mr. Speaker, as a speech from the throne indicated yesterday, our government is committed to growth that works for everyone.
Question carried. I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, our healthcare system is broken. Hospitals and patient beds closed across the province, and healthcare workers are leaving. Today, 36,000 people in this province are waiting for surgery, and in our largest centre, there isn't a single family doctor who's able to take on new patients. This can only be described as a crisis. And Mr. Speaker, I wonder if that Premier agrees, or does he side with his health minister, who suggests that he doesn't see, quote, anything wrong with the system?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Premier.
Mr. Speaker, and welcome to the new Leader of the Opposition to the Assembly in this role, and I thank her for the question. Most certainly in this province and up to and including our speech from the throne yesterday, Mr. Speaker, this is a government that has been very focused on growth that works for everyone in this province, Mr. Speaker. When it comes to health care, we're seeing investment in our 4-point plan to train, to recruit, Mr. Speaker, to recruit, to retain, and to incentivize health care workers, medical health care professionals across this province, Mr. Speaker. We have the most ambitious plan in the nation of Canada that is in place. We funded that plan, Mr. Speaker, through the strength of our economy. $60 million has been provided, Mr. Speaker, and in the weeks ahead, Mr. Speaker, you're going to see that plan action with people landing not only in the province but in our healthcare facilities, bringing support to our frontline workers, Mr. Speaker, that are providing healthcare services to the people of this province, Mr. Speaker. Most certainly, we have a plan, Mr. Speaker. We funded that plan, and now we are putting that plan into action, bringing people into our communities, Mr. Speaker, to provide the needed services that we have.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Well, Mr. Speaker, let me tell that Premier that growth is not working for everyone in this province. It's been nearly 9 months since we asked for affordability relief to help with gas prices, to help with groceries, to help people who are trying to cover the latest round of Sask Party tax hikes, and to support families who, thanks to this government, will be paying more to heat their homes and to turn on the lights this winter. To date, we've not seen a single cent from that Premier. And worse, this government is actually making life more expensive. Why did that Premier wait so long?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Premier.
Speaker, growth that works for everyone and the strength of our economy and investing back into the affordability of Saskatchewan families and Saskatchewan people has been paramount for this government for 15 years now, Mr. Speaker. $2 billion has been invested in this year's budget a number of months ago into affordability measures, removing, for example, as we say many times, 112,000 people off the tax roll. Saskatchewan family of 4 starts paying taxes at $53,000. That's over double the amount they began paying taxes under the New Democrats, Mr. Speaker. We are reducing our child care, working collaboratively with the federal government, down to focusing on a $10 a day child care, the second lowest utility bundle, in addition to those $2 billion provided each and every year. Affordability measures to Saskatchewan people this year, $500 tax affordability credit check going out in the weeks ahead, Mr. Speaker. We extended the 0% small business tax, supporting our small business that are the heartbeat of our communities, Mr. Speaker, and we've retired $1 billion of debt this year.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the Premier waited till a week before a by-election to announce those checks, and frankly, the people of the province saw right through it. And speaking of their record, over the last decade, there's been a dismal 1% increase to full-time jobs in this province under that government.
1% increase over a whole decade. Second last amongst all the provinces. A terrible track record on jobs, made all the more worse yesterday with their announcement that they're going to shutter liquor stores and throw 400 more Saskatchewan people out of work before Christmas. Shame. Mr. Speaker, I want to know, does the Premier actually think that a 1% increase over a decade to full-time jobs is something to be proud of, and why is he busy axing even more jobs?
Recognize the Minister of Trade and Export Development.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I can't tell you how happy I am to talk about our economy, which is performing more strongly than any in the country, Mr. Speaker. We have the lowest unemployment rate in Canada, 24,000 new jobs created over the last year, Mr. Speaker, a rate of job growth that the NDP never in their 16 years of government ever experienced, Mr. Speaker. The highest population growth in the entire history that's recorded of the province's population growth, Mr. Speaker. Our exports up not 20%, Mr. Speaker, not 30%, not 40%, not even 50%, 55% in 1 year, Mr. Speaker. Our exports are up so far this year, and that is because we're engaging internationally, Mr. Speaker, setting up offices around the world to increase our exports, which I would add those members adamantly oppose and have criticized and attacked, Mr. Speaker. We are projected to lead Canada in economic growth, not just this year, Mr. Speaker, not just next year, but for the next 3 years, Mr. Speaker. This economy is moving forward. We put in place policies to make sure that's the case, and the credit is to the job creators and entrepreneurs in this province who are making it happen.
Recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Mr. Speaker, the question was for the Premier and not that out-of-touch minister. But speaking of out-of-touch, Mr. Speaker, yesterday we saw Colin Thatcher attend the speech from the throne, invited by the architect of the Premier's separation tour and white paper. That senior member of government who invited Thatcher said he was, quote, a fine individual. Does the Premier understand the signal that this sends in a province with the highest in the nation interpersonal violence rates? A simple question, and this is to the Premier. Will he condemn that decision, and will he apologize?
I have to call that question out of order. That's the whole point of the issue about someone being invited or not is out of order, so I'll call that out of order. I recognize the member from Saskatoon University.
Mr. Speaker, this is what the Supreme Court said about how Joanne Wilson died. Quote, at about 6 o'clock in the evening of January 21st, 1983, Joanne Wilson came home, drove into the garage of her home, and was ferociously beaten and then shot to death. 27 wounds were inflicted on her head, neck, hands, and lower legs. The injuries included a broken arm, a fracture of the wrist, and a severed little left finger. A single bullet entered her skull, causing death. Colin Thatcher was convicted of murdering Joanne Wilson, and he was here in this assembly yesterday, here as a guest. What message does the Premier think it sends to have Colin Thatcher, a convicted wife killer?
Sorry, I have to call that out of order as well. Next question.
Mr. Speaker, Saskatchewan has the highest rates of domestic violence in the entire country, more than double the national average. It is a crisis. What message does it send to women in this province when this government extends the honour of a throne speech to a convicted wife killer?
Hear, hear. Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Justice.
Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the rates of personal violence, of interpersonal violence in this country, in this province, are a tragedy. They are numbers and rates that we must do everything we can to stand together to bring down. And we, of course, take this extremely seriously in the province of Saskatchewan. We've invested in early intervention and prevention. That's well documented, Mr. Speaker. We were the first jurisdiction in Canada to implement Clare's Law. This year, we've allocated $25 million for interpersonal violence supports, including $1 million to support children exposed to violence, a terrible offshoot of this scourge, Mr. Speaker, $650,000 for early outreach and support through the very well-regarded first Family Intervention Rapid Supports Teams program in a number of communities across the province. Mr. Speaker, the commitment is there, the attendant funding has been there, and we are all in this together. We have to be agents of change on this issue.
Tonight's a member from Saskatoon University.
Mr. Speaker, this throne speech talks a lot about getting tough on crime, certain kinds of crime, I guess. Yet yesterday, a convicted wife murderer sat in this chamber. This is disgusting. Again, what message does it send to the women of this province when the honor of a throne speech is extended to a convicted wife killer?
I'm sorry, that's out of order as well. Next question. Recognize the member from Saskatoon University.
Mr. Speaker, yesterday, a senior member of the government said that convicted wife murderer Colin Thatcher was a fine individual. Does the minister agree that Colin Thatcher is a fine individual?
Out of order, I'm sorry. Move on to another topic or phrase it differently, please. Recognize the member from Regina University.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, I was going to say it was good to be back, but that's a remarking display of cowardice by members on that side. And you know, Mr. Speaker, this utter lack of leadership doesn't just stop in this chamber. That Sask Party government's leadership has led to a 1% growth record in jobs. They have created only 4,700 full-time jobs in the last decade. In other words, 1% growth. And now that's a terrible, terrible record. Apart from Newfoundland and Labrador, it's the worst in Canada. So when it comes to creating good, mortgage-paying, full-time jobs, this Sask Party government in the last 10 years second last, second worst. So, Mr. Speaker, who today will the honourable minister be wagging his finger at to pass the blame for his government's own shameful record?
Recognize the Minister of Trade and Export Development.
Mr. Speaker, we are incredibly proud of our record on the economy, which has shown economic growth in a context that we have never seen in the history of this province before, Mr. Speaker. That is the reality. The NDP seem to live in an alternate reality on these things, Mr. Speaker. The reality is that we have the lowest unemployment rate in Canada. And in fact, Mr. Speaker, we are projected to have the lowest unemployment rate in Canada for not just this year, but the next 3 years, Mr. Speaker. In addition to that, our economy this year is leading the country in economic growth. And not just for this year, Mr. Speaker, but projected to lead for the next 3 years. We have seen well over $10 billion of new investments that have been committed to this province, Mr. Speaker, over the course of the next number of years. A rate of investment, Mr. Speaker, that we have, again, not seen in the history of this province, including and particularly the times that those members were in office, Mr. Speaker. Those members, you know, they stand up. We know what they don't like because they talk about what they don't like all the time. They don't like energy, Mr. Speaker. They don't like oil. They don't like gas. They don't like pipelines. They don't like mining. Mr. Speaker, the list will continue in the next question. I look forward to it.
Recognize the member from Regina University.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. And it's clear on this side of the House we don't like convicted wife killers on the floor of this Assembly. And you know, Mr. Speaker, the only reason the honourable minister can grapple at that math is because thousands of people are leaving the province. 10,000 young people have left Saskatchewan since that premier was elected. So let's take a tour, see where those people are going, Mr. Speaker. Beautiful PEI with a population smaller than Regina's, a tenth the size of Saskatchewan, has created 6,500 full-time jobs in the last 10 years for a growth rate 10 times Saskatchewan's. Just next door in Manitoba, 37,000 jobs with a growth rate 7 times higher. Now, we can keep going. We've got 6 more provinces to tour, but a 1% growth rate, Mr. Speaker, one of Canada's worst job creation records. Now, I know the members love throwing themselves press conferences for being second last, but has this government stopped to explore why, when almost every other province has succeeded in creating full-time jobs, they have failed? Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of Trade and Export Development.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I am convinced that they live in a completely alternate reality. We had the last population report, Mr. Speaker, showed the highest quarter of population growth in the. They're heckling from their seats, Mr. Speaker. The highest quarter of population growth in the history of Saskatchewan. In one quarter, Mr. Speaker, the province grew by more than the entire time of their 16 years in government, Mr. Speaker. In one quarter. This year, we're going to surpass 1.2 million population, Mr. Speaker. Again, a rate of growth that we have not seen since the 1930s in this province, and something that they said was entirely impossible, Mr. Speaker, when they were in government. In addition to that, Mr. Speaker, we're seeing the economy lead Canada in terms of growth, not just this year, but the next 3 years, Mr. Speaker. And as for that list, Mr. Speaker, we know what's driving the growth in this economy. It's our resource sector, food, fuel, and fertilizer. Mr. Speaker, they don't like the energy sector. They don't like the mining sector, Mr. Speaker. They don't like nuclear. They don't like uranium. They don't like any of the things driving this economy.
I recognize the member from Regina University.
Why, thank you, Mr. Speaker. You know, the minister opposite wants to talk about the past, the future, anything but the present, because his record speaks for itself. Right. On job creation, total employment growth, 9th out of 10. Population growth, 9th out of 10. Full-time employment growth, 9th out of 10. And now we heard nothing in the speech from the throne about a jobs plan to fix this government's shameful record. In fact, quite the opposite. One of their priorities, part of growth that works for everyone, is actually eliminating hundreds and hundreds of full-time SLGA retail jobs. Right. Now, to the minister, does he realize that firing hundreds and hundreds of workers across the province is actually going to make the jobs numbers worse?
Recognize the Minister of Sask Bills.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, I have some supportive quotes I'd like to read into the record. The first quote being, "I believe that the Saskatchewan government should phase out running any liquor stores. I honestly believe it's time to rip the Band-Aid off." Second quote, Mr. Speaker, "I see the benefits of having private corporations run these stores. These privately run stores are doing an excellent job of servicing the Saskatchewan community." Quote number 3, Mr. Speaker, "The SLGA should immediately consider shifting its liquor retail permit structure to mirror that of the cannabis permit policies it holds." Mr. Speaker, these quotes are from the new member from Saskatoon-Meewasin and the NDP SLGA critic.
Recognize the member from Regina University.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Just a truly remarkable show of dignity and compassion for the 350 families who are going to be without a paycheck heading into Christmas. So to that minister, Mr. Speaker, while I'm sure she feels great for patting herself on the back and playing cheap politics when people are going to be going without a paycheck, is that what she would stand up and say to the over 300 people who are going to be without work in this province? Hear, hear.
Recognize the Minister of SLGA.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Mr. Speaker, the 34 stores that comprise SLGA Retail have seen their net income decline by 96% since 2018. This is expected to continue to decline, and that SLGA Retail will begin to lose money in the coming years. Currently, it makes up less than 1% of SLGA revenue, contrary to what members opposite think. Profits in 21-22 were $3.2 million, with projections for 22-23 at $395,000. Initial estimates indicate it would take significant capital spending to make SLGA retail outlets competitive again, with no guarantee that this spending would result in a return in investment. This is money that could go towards new schools, hospitals, or even highways, Mr. Speaker.
Hear. Recognize the member from Regina Rosemont.
Mr. Speaker, it's that outsourced, low-wage, privatized approach from the Sask Party that's put this economy on ice, that's weakened our economy and sold out workers once again. It has been months since inflation and the war in Ukraine sent the cost of living through the roof for Saskatchewan families, all while sending revenues soaring for that government. But this tired Sask Party government still hasn't delivered affordability relief for families, denying them of the support they need and deserve. In fact, beyond belief, they've made things worse by imposing new taxes, hiking fees, and cranking up the cost of power bills and energy bills in a massive way for Saskatchewan families. Why is this government failing Saskatchewan people? Why have they not delivered a single cent of affordability relief?
Recognize the Minister of Finance.
Mr. Speaker, the member opposite knew that the government would look at whether or not resource revenues were going to hold and make an announcement at Q1, which we did. That includes the over $2 billion of measures that we have in each and every budget to address affordability for individuals and families within our province. Within that announcement, Mr. Speaker, along with a very large debt reduction, which will reduce interest rates in years to come, that can be spent on priorities that people want in this province, healthcare and education. We will be giving a $500 affordability tax credit to each and every individual in the province that is 18 or over. Mr. Speaker, that surpasses all of the measures that the NDP said that they would do. And what they were also going to do was increase the resource surcharge without consultation, quite frankly, with the industry. We believe that we are collecting taxes from the resource revenues, and it's growth that works for everyone.
Recognize the member from Regina Rosemont.
Those one-time dollars will be welcomed if and when they finally are received by Saskatchewan people. But the minister knows full well those dollars don't come close to making up for the increased cost of living that families are facing. And those rebates, they don't fairly support those that are raising children, excluding children on this front. This government is imposing new taxes, hiking fees, and increasing power and energy bills to cover over for their massive failures, their financial incompetence year after year, the GTH, the bypass, and so much more. How does this out-of-touch government defend waiting so long to get help out the doors to families who so desperately need and deserve it?
Recognize the Minister of Finance.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I dare to say the $500 that we are making available to anyone in the province 18 years or over far surpasses the $105 that the NDP said that they would have for individuals. Mr. Speaker, the Crown corporations need to operate on a business case, and therefore those fees will not create a large increase in the Crown Corporation. Minister can speak further to that. Annually, the $500 will more than cover that increase, Mr. Speaker. But again, I will speak to the fact that we have over $2 billion in this budget, in next year's budget, in budgets in the past, and budgets in the future to address affordability measures for individuals within our province.
Hear. Recognize the member from Regina Rosemont.
That high-flying minister couldn't be more out of touch, Mr. Speaker. This is a government that voted against providing relief at the pumps, that hid and hoarded windfall revenues while people faced record cost of living, and they voted to put new taxes on Grey Cup tickets, rider tickets, a night at the movies, so much more. Fee after fee was hiked, like hunting licenses, Mr. Speaker. And they cranked up the cost of power and energy bills heading into winter in a massive way for Saskatchewan families. At a time when families needed their government to make life a little easier, this government is choosing to make life harder. One-time relief sometime down the road for some doesn't change the fact that this government's choices will make life more expensive this year and every year thereafter, into perpetuity. It's indefensible. How has this government fallen so out of touch with the cost of living challenge that families are facing? And why have they given up on helping them?
Hear, hear. Recognize the Premier.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and I thank all the members opposite for the questions around affordability, which are a primary concern to all Canadians, Mr. Speaker, in particular to those in Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker. That's why we move forward annually with over $2 billion of affordability measures. That's why we added $450 million in this year's budget Mr. Speaker. The Minister of Finance has indicated we're going to be sending out $500 affordability tax credit checks, Mr. Speaker. The members opposite asked for $105 checks. We're handing out $500 checks, Mr. Speaker, and that's due to the strength of our economy, Mr. Speaker. That's due to the growth in this province, Mr. Speaker, and we're making decisions to ensure that that growth does work for everyone, Mr. Speaker, and today in Saskatchewan, it's working for more people. 192,000 more people live here today than in 2007, compared to 15 years earlier, down 600 people, Mr. Speaker, in the province. Mr. Speaker, we most certainly are going to continue to focus on growth that works for everyone in Saskatchewan. And when the NDP were in government, there was no growth, and they didn't work for anybody, Mr. Speaker.
Ministerial statements. Introduction of bills. Presenting reports by standing and special committees. I recognize the Deputy Chair of the Standing Committee on House Services.
Mr. Speaker, I'm instructed by the Standing Committee on House Services to inform the Assembly that the committee filed its 8th report with the Clerk on June 21st, 2022, pursuant to Rule 136.6. The report reflects the changes made to the Standing Committee's membership. I move that the 8th report of the Standing Committee on House Services be now concurred in.
It has been moved by the Deputy Chair that the 8th report of the Standing Committee on House Services be now concurred in. Is the Assembly ready for the question? Is it pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried. Why is the Premier on his feet?
Press leave to move a motion of condolence.
Premier has requested leave to move a motion of condolence. Is leave granted? Leave has been granted. The Premier may proceed.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleagues for this leave, Mr. Speaker. We are now a few weeks removed from the very horrific events that took place at James Smith Cree Nation as well as at the village of Weldon. But the shock of what occurred is still felt across Saskatchewan, and I would say it's felt across the nation of Canada. And nowhere is this trauma and sorrow felt more deeply and more profoundly than in the communities that have been directly affected. Mr. Speaker, it's still hard to believe what transpired in early September in our Saskatchewan community of James Smith Cree Nation as well as the village of Weldon. There's 11 people ranging in the age from 23 to 78 years old that were killed. 18 others were wounded in that attack, and some of the injured spent many weeks in hospital, and they are still recovering from their physical wounds today, and I am sure will be dealing with the emotional wounds for many years to come. This tragic event shattered the lives of so many Saskatchewan residents. These crimes We're committed in a relatively small and isolated communities, yes, mainly in a First Nations community, and we might be tempted to say that this might never happen where we live in this province, and maybe say that this could never happen to us. But Mr. Speaker, we also need to ask ourselves, what if it did happen to us? What if it happened in our community? What if it happened in our street, our doorstep? How would we cope as residents? How could we possibly get over the loss of a loved one taken from us in what is an absolute senseless eruption of violence? Well, Mr. Speaker, the families of the 18 people that died in the Humboldt bus crash in 2018, they don't have to imagine what it's like to suddenly lose someone you love. They've experienced it, and they're still living through it today. After the attacks in September, those families reached out, more recent attacks in James Smith. They reached out to the families from James Smith and Weldon, as well as the community members, and they urged all Canadians to extend the same support that they received after that fatal bus crash to their brothers and sisters in the communities of James Smith and Weldon. Brothers and sisters. Mr. Speaker, that's how the Humboldt families put it. And it's the right way for all of us to think about it. Today on James Smith, and particularly our brothers and sisters are hurting. Mothers and fathers, sons and daughters, they are in deep despair. Members of our extended Saskatchewan family, they need our support. And they will need our support for some time to come. Their burden is our burden, and it's ours to share. And we'll be there for them in the long haul. Mr. Speaker, when a community is struck by a sudden tragedy, it's a huge test of that community's leadership. Leaders are subject to the very same emotions that everyone else is, but they have a duty to remain strong and remain focused, and to guide the people that they lead through troubled waters. And that's exactly what we've seen in the aftermath of this tragedy. Strong, inspiring leadership from Chief Wally Burns, from Chief Robert Head, and Chief Kelvin Sanderson. From James Smith council members, from elders in the community, and those working within administration. Mr. Speaker, we've seen leadership at every level. Along with the member from Melfort, I had the privilege of visiting James Smith, Mr. Speaker, alongside as well the member from Saskatoon Centre. I witnessed firsthand how the community has come together to support families affected and to begin that long process of healing. And it will be a long, hard journey, but James Smith and the community members there will not walk alone. The Indigenous community in Saskatchewan, from the FSIN to tribal councils to individual First Nations, they will be there, I know, every step of the way. There are many examples, but one that comes to mind immediately is the fish fry that was held at James Smith, hosted by Peter Ballantyne Cree Nation. They brought nearly 700 kilograms of fish down from Reindeer Lake, fresh walleye, trout, whitefish, and they fried that up and they served it with a lot of love, and likely some lemon as well. It was a wonderful event. Tommy Bird, one of the organizers from Peter Ballantyne, he said that for a moment the atmosphere at James Smith changed from grieving and mourning to laughter. And he said, I quote, everybody was happy with a smile on their face and a full belly of fish. Well, Mr. Speaker, we're grateful for the way First Nations communities, First Nations people in Saskatchewan have rallied around James Smith and in their hour of need. Our government is engaging with the leadership of James Smith on a continuous basis. Last week we met to discuss a range of issues, including the need for expanded addictions treatment services and enhanced mental health services, as well as better housing in the community. Mr. Speaker, we are also discussing policing models that will meet the needs of First Nations communities. Minister of Government Relations, Rural and Remote Health, as well as Corrections and Policing attended that meeting last week, along with the members from Melfort, the member for Athabasca, and the member for Saskatoon, Churchill-Wildwood. We're also discussing ways to improve public safety across Saskatchewan. This is a major concern, not just in the community of James Smith, not just in Indigenous communities across Saskatchewan, but in many rural areas as well as our urban centres. In the speech from the throne, you heard more about the government's commitment to keeping families safe in their community. What happened in September on James Smith and in Weldon was frightening for the entire province. Mr. Speaker, this was one of the largest police operations in the history of Saskatchewan. It involved more than 200 RCMP officers from 4 provinces. Nearly 40 members of the Regina Police Service were involved, and members of the Prince Albert Police Service were involved, staff members from the Ministry of Corrections, Policing and Public Safety, and more than 40 members of the Provincial Protective Service branch also involved. And Mr. Speaker, I would like to say thank you to all of those officers that were involved. We're grateful for their courage and their dedication, and we're also thankful for the important work offered by our first responders, our EMTs, the paramedics, STARS and air ambulance, the medical teams in the hospitals caring for those that needed the services. I don't think there's any question how valuable our healthcare workers are, especially at times like this. Mr. Speaker, our task now as a province is to remember the victims, to hold them in our hearts, and to celebrate their lives, and do all that we can to support the loved ones and the communities in the weeks and months ahead. We know that the healing process will take time, and it most certainly won't be an easy road to travel. But we will make this journey together. We will be there for James Smith Cree Nation. We'll be there for the village of Weldon as long as it takes. We'll get through this together as one collective province. Mr. Speaker, by leave of this Assembly, I would like to move the following motion: that the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan express its deepest sympathies and condolences to the families and the friends of Thomas Burns, who's 23 years old, from James Smith Cree Nation, Saskatchewan. Carol Burns, 46 years old, from James Smith Cree Nation. Gregory Burns, 28 years old, from James Smith Cree Nation. Lydia Gloria Burns, 61 years old, from James Smith Cree Nation. Bonnie Burns, 48 years old, from James Smith Cree Nation. Earl Burns, 66 years old, from James Smith Cree Nation. Lana Head, 49 years old, from James Smith Cree Nation. Christian Head, 54 years old, from James Smith Cree Nation. Robert Sanderson, 49 years old, from James Smith Cree Nation. Damian Sanderson, 31 years old, from James Smith Cree Nation. And Wesley Patterson, 78 years old, from Weldon, Saskatchewan. In so doing, express this Assembly's support for their loved ones and community, and the entire province of Saskatchewan as they mourn during this time of tragic loss, and further, that this Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan express its profound gratitude for the dedication of the Saskatchewan first responders, the RCMP, community leaders, and many medical professionals whose courage throughout this horrific tragedy shall never be forgotten.
Will the Assembly take the motion as read? Is the Assembly ready for the question? I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to join the Premier and all members in this Assembly today to support this motion and to share words of condolence and support to all of those impacted by the tragedy that took place on September 4th of this year on James Smith Cree Nation and in the town of Weldon. James Smith Cree Nation and surrounding communities and our province will be forever changed by the tragedy that took the lives of 11 family and community members that day. 11 family members gone too soon, 11 families grieving their tragic and unexpected passing. And a whole community shook by the loss, the terrible loss of 11 prominent leaders, celebrated elders, and young members with so much life left to experience. We want to offer to all of the families, the survivors, community members, and to all those impacted, that we know that no one who has not experienced such a tragic loss can begin to understand your grief during this devastating time. But we do know that it's important that we remember those lost and to support all those that they leave behind. And it's important that we continue to speak their names and that we, as legislators, always work to create a better, more fair society, to keep senseless events like this from ever happening again. And I ask that all members join me in remembering the 11 lives lost on that tragic day. Thomas Burns, Carol Burns, Gregory Burns, Lydia Gloria Burns, Bonnie Burns, Lana Head, Christian Head, Robert Sanderson, Damian Sanderson, Wesley Peterson. It's understood that communities come together in times of hardship, in times of crisis, in times of tragedy, often in ways that they've never been called to come together before. And I think that that is especially so in Saskatchewan. In times of need, when we're at our best, we show our strength, our resilience, and our dedication to one another and the well-being of the community. James Smith Cree Nation and the surrounding community is no different. I know that in the days and weeks following the tragedy, communities across Saskatchewan joined with James Smith Cree Nation to provide support and condolences in ways large and small, the ways that people knew how. Many nations, some near and some far, as the Premier mentioned, with the fish fry, came to the community, banded together with local community members. Many people donated their time, preparing and providing food and other supports, services for survivors and volunteers alike, who often were going without sleep and doing everything they could to provide assistance. And I want to thank all those who donated their time, including some of my colleagues, in the days following September 4th. Those who spent countless hours and days with community members, listening, standing with, helping where they could, where they were needed, often in the community kitchen, preparing and serving food for the community and volunteers, food that had come in from all over the province. And I'd like to especially thank the member for Saskatoon Centre for being present in every sense of the word. While a community in grief and shock got through those terrible, terrible first days. What I witnessed in my short time there, and I'm sure those who were there can attest, was a community dedicated to each other and providing what was needed, even though, as we can all imagine, there is no roadmap when something like this happens. A community that experienced collective pain, but one that showed real strength and resilience in supporting one another. I want to pay special tribute to the leadership, the chiefs, council, all of those volunteers who I know went for days without sleeping, having lost in many cases, in all cases, people who were special and important to them, family members. Our thoughts are with them and continue to be with them. Mr. Speaker, as I said, I want to join with the Premier and all members in this Assembly in extending our deepest condolences, but also commit to continuing to check in with the community so that the grief that they are experiencing, the loss, is not forgotten, and commit to making the changes needed to ensure that something like this never happens again.
Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried. Why is the Government House Leader on his feet?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request leave to move a motion of transmittal.
The Government House Leaders asked for a leave to move a transmittal motion. Is leave granted? Leave has been granted. I recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the Speaker, on behalf of the Legislative Assembly, transmit copies of the motion as well as the verbatim transcripts of the debate to the families of those lost, to Chief Wally Burns, Chief Robert Head, and Chief Kelvin Sanderson, and to the village of Weldon. I so move.
It has been moved by the Government House Leader that the Speaker, on behalf of the Legislative Assembly, transmit copies of the motion as well as the verbatim transcripts of the debate to the families of those lost, to Chief Wally Burns, Chief Robert Head, and Chief Calvin Sanderson, and to the village of Weldon. Is the Assembly ready for the question? Is it a pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried. Why is the Premier on his feet?
Mr. Speaker, I'd request leave to move a motion for an address to His Majesty the King.
The Premier has requested leave to move a motion of an address to His Majesty the King. Is leave granted? Leave has been granted. I recognize the Premier.
Well, thank you, Mr. Speaker, and thank you to my colleagues, Mr. Speaker. There was a banner headline atop the front page of the Regina Leader Post on June the 2nd of 1953, and it read very simply, "Long may she reign." Below that headline were several stories detailing the coronation of Queen Elizabeth on a rainy day in London, nearly 70 years ago, with her 4-year-old son, Charles, who was watching close by. It was reported that the Queen, just 27 years old at the time, managed to get through the elaborate ceremony with great poise and only the faintest trace of nervousness. And her long reign as our sovereign began. And it began with a steadiness and a strong sense of purpose. And that was the way it ended just a few weeks ago when Queen Elizabeth passed, after working right up to and including her final days. With her last official statement, an expression of condolence to those that were affected by the attacks that took place on James Smith Cree Nation as well as in the village of Weldon. And Mr. Speaker, I think many of us were surprised and deeply saddened by the Queen's passing, even though we knew she was well into her 90s. We were saddened because we could always count on her. She was always there. She was a constant, a reassuring, redoubtable presence in the world that is consistently changing. Mr. Speaker, Her Majesty carried out her duties with unwavering faith and, I would say, a quiet sense of authority. During her visits to Saskatchewan, she was gracious, she was engaged and genuinely interested in our province and the people who live here. We admired the Queen, and we admired the way she carried herself. She was serious, but not stodgy. She was earnest, but not humorless. She was restrained, but not aloof. She had, as one observer put it, the instinctive prudence of someone who was raised in a time of war. Her Majesty was from the generation that always finished the food on her plate. The generation that was never given to showy displays of emotion. Before she became Queen, Her Majesty declared that her entire life would be devoted to service on behalf of her subjects, and she was true to every word. Service on behalf of others. Service on behalf of her nation. And service on behalf of the Commonwealth. This was the higher purpose. This defined her long, memorable reign. Mr. Speaker, Queen Elizabeth was a unifying figure in all of our lives. She was an inspiring presence for so many, and I know that we will miss her greatly. But I also know that Her Majesty will live on in our hearts, in each of our hearts forever. So, Mr. Speaker, be it resolved that a humble address be presented to His Majesty, the King, in the following words. To the King's Most Excellent Majesty, we, the members of the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan, in session assembled, respectfully tender our deep sympathy for the loss you have suffered by the death of Your Majesty's mother, our late beloved sovereign. Your Majesty's sorrow is shared by the people of Saskatchewan, with a deep sense of loss arising from their recollections of a dignified and graceful monarch of Canada and the Commonwealth. Many in our province have fond memories of Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II as she visited our province first as Princess Elizabeth in 1951, and then on 5 occasions as Queen in 1959, 1973, 1978, 1987, and lastly in 2005. We humbly pray that the knowledge of Her late Majesty's long life of selfless devotion to the duty, the integrity, and the wisdom, which left a deep and lasting impact on so many people in Saskatchewan and around the world, will sustain comfort to you and your family. Amid the grief attendant upon the death of your beloved mother, we welcome Your Majesty's accession to the throne. As members of the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan, we pledge that it shall be our constitutional desire to uphold and support Your Majesty to the utmost of our authority. I so move.
Will the Assembly take the motion as read? Is the Assembly ready for the question? I recognize the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I rise to join the Premier and all members of this Assembly to share words of condolence to His Majesty, the King of Canada, on the passing of His Majesty's mother, the late Majesty Queen Elizabeth II. It was with a heavy heart that we heard of the death of Her Majesty. I was traveling to Yorkton to address the Chamber of Commerce and received the news just a few minutes before I arrived. It was hard to believe. Hard to believe because for most of my entire life, and I think for the entire lives of everyone in this Assembly, the Queen was the only monarch we'd ever known. And we all have those moments in our life. Where were you when you heard the news? Moments that you know that you were living through history. Mr. Speaker, I know that we've had a lot of those memories in recent weeks and years, but this was certainly one of them. And one that everyone the world over shared. No matter where we live on the planet or how different we may be. We collectively shared that moment. Mr. Speaker, I know that it was a moment that we all expected would happen, but it's hard to imagine a world without her constant presence in our lives. As the Premier mentioned, the Queen's first visit to our province as sovereign was in 1959. She'd already been monarch for a few years, was still quite young at the time. First, she visited Saskatoon with a greeting by war veterans and toured the University of Saskatchewan. Then she moved on to Regina. The Royals were greeted by 100,000 people when they arrived. 100,000 people, Mr. Speaker. Regina was barely that size at the time. I wonder what she must have thought coming to our small prairie city and seeing that crowd lined up to greet her. From early on, she was just as revered here as she was around the world. Mr. Speaker, we all know we are legislators in a constitutional monarchy. With such grace and dedication, Her Majesty was the embodiment of that crown. We are entrusted, and we are so privileged to work on behalf of the great people of this province. And it's through this system that we enjoy stability, the peaceful transfer of power. We mourn the death of Her late Majesty, and we are fortunate to know that this House will continue to prioritize order and good governance. Mr. Speaker, Her Majesty may have left us, but she left the monarchy more humble and more in touch with the common person than she found it. And I think we can all agree that she made good on her promise to dedicate her life, 70 years, to the service of others. Please join me in remembering her leadership, distinction, and grace. Long live the King.
Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt the motion? Carried. Why is the Government House Leader on its feet?
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I request leave to move a motion of transmittal.
Government House Leader has asked for leave to move a transmittal motion. Is leave granted? Leave has been granted. I recognize the Government House Leader.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I move that the address to His Majesty King Charles III be engrossed, signed by the Speaker, and forwarded through proper channels.
It has been moved by the Government House Leader that the address to His Majesty King Charles III be engrossed, signed by the Speaker, forwarded through proper channels. Is the Assembly ready for the question? Is it the pleasure of the Assembly to adopt this motion? Carried. Before orders of the day, I'd like to address the ruling about questions being taken that were out of order. I refer to members to the Rules and Procedures of the Legislative Assembly of Saskatchewan. Question period, scope of questions 20-2. Questions relating to any matter within the administrative competence of the government or on matters related to individual ministerial responsibility may be asked by a minister of the Crown. Questions on issues not officially connected with the government of a private nature related to Board of Internal Economy, caucus, party, or political responsibilities are prohibited. Orders of the day.
Special order, consideration of the speech of His Honour, the Lieutenant Governor.
I recognize the member from Regina Walsh Acres.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. Truly an honor to stand at any time in this House, but even more so today as I am humbled to be the first to address both yourself and the members of this House and offer my support and movement to the speech from the throne. I'd like to thank the Premier for bestowing this privilege of moving the motion of support for what I believe is an important, powerful, and timely speech from the throne for the people of our province. There's so much to talk about in this that I actually had trouble sleeping last night. I was wrestling around. I woke up at about 2:30 in the morning, went for a little bit of a walk. It felt like one when I was a young kid and getting ready to go to Disney World, and you wake up and you just can't get back to sleep. It's Christmas time. I tried everything. I was listening to music. I even listened to Beyonce last night to try and get back to sleep, Mr. Speaker. But yeah, not much was working. But I think more so than delivering this speech that has me excited is the province of Saskatchewan right now. To be quite honest, this speech from the throne encompasses the reason that I got into political life. Because I've always believed that our province is something special. And I've always wanted to see our province sit at the adult table. For too many years when I was young and in the 90s, I always felt like we were at the kid table and nobody listened to us and we just kind of were looking over to the Albertas of our country. Well, not anymore, Mr. Speaker. We are sitting at that adult table, and this throne speech outlines how we're going to continue to sit there and have our voice heard. Hard to believe, 2 years ago, I woke up on this very day and found myself with the realization that we just won an election, and our campaign team in Walsh Acres was victorious. It's truly an honor. Time has flown by, but we've accomplished so much in Walsh Acres, in Regina, and in our province in those 2 years, and we don't do it alone. I want to thank my constituency assistants, Danny Rogers, Kim Stoker. They have the task of not only keeping me in line, keeping me on time, but they are the first point of contact for any constituents or any residents of the province reaching out, and they really do such a wonderful job. The staff here in the building, the clerks, the admins, the assistants, the chiefs, they go above and beyond, helping us out with our casework so we are able to help out the people of the province information for guidance and getting them to the right resources that they may need. And our caucus office, both past and present, they sure shone yesterday as well again. They're here early in the morning, Mr. Speaker, till late at night, getting us the information, supporting the MLAs. But I want to say one special thank you to John Saltasuk, who just recently left the building. He was our chief of staff in the caucus office for a decade. Johnny Caucus, he'll certainly be missed. I called him a professional babysitter, looking after 48 MLAs and their staff and trying to keep us all organized and on the same page. So I want to say thank you to John Saltasuk for his time here in the building. And a warm welcome to Ange Curry, our new chief of staff, who is no stranger to anyone, but Ange is already seamlessly fitting in. Finally, I want to say thank you to the people from Walsh Acres for keeping me informed. We had a great summer this summer, knocking on doors and listening to people, hearing their concerns, listening to their hopes for our province. So I want to say thank you to them. And finally, to my family. Words spoken in this House, the words recorded and answered can't express what they mean to me. Every one of us in here understands that our family has to make a big commitment and a big sacrifice, and certainly mine is no different. We get home late at nights. Last night, for instance, didn't get to see the kids go to bed. But when you wake up in the morning and Sebastian comes and he says, "Dad, can I have a hug?" It's pretty special. And, they sacrifice a lot for us to be in here and serve the people of this province. And I would dare say they're serving the people of this province right along with us. So Saskatchewan, well, the saying goes, home is where the heart is, and Saskatchewan is my home, and it is our home. And when listening to the throne speech yesterday delivered by the Lieutenant Governor, I started thinking about Saskatchewan, and my thoughts always go to 1905, when our province was formed, 117 years old, but we're so much older than that. Saskatchewan-Sippy, Rupert's Land, the Northwest Territories. Our history dates back thousands of years, Mr. Speaker. It's centuries of Indigenous ancestors hunting, fishing, surviving, thriving on this land. It's 1774 when Samuel Hearne built Cumberland House for the Hudson Bay Company, the first permanent settlement here in the province. It's the generations to come after, the First Nations peoples, the explorers, the homesteaders, the pioneers, the farmers, the dreamers, the doers. That is what Saskatchewan is. It's what it always has been, and it's what it will always be. Recently, we had a number of foreign diplomats visiting our province and seeing what we have to offer. And I took note of the ambassador from Hungary. She said, I could sum up Saskatchewan in 3 words: tradition, passion, and innovation. And I thought, what a great line. You know, here's somebody who has come to our province to learn about all the wonderful resources and what we have, and she nailed it. She absolutely nailed it. We are about tradition, we are about passion, and we are about innovation. So as I mentioned, over the summer, I think all of us were out and about, certainly in our constituencies. I had the good fortune of not only being out in Walsh Acres and around Regina, but toured around the province a bit. I was in our Deputy Premier's community not long ago of Humboldt. I was in Wolseley, up north to Waskesiu to Wolseley, I said, down to Estevan, all over the province, also to Melville. And we heard the concerns of people in this province and the hopes. And number one on those concerns, I think, is fair to say, was healthcare. And it has been a challenging time in healthcare, not only in Saskatchewan, but clear across the country in North America. I had a chance to talk with nurses like Janine or Sarah and really try and help boil down, you know, where could the government put some of our resources. Our health ministers also toured all over this summer and came out with the Health Human Resources Action Plan to recruit, retain, incentivize, and train. What does that mean? Well, it means $60 million of investment, yes, but it means that we are reopening some of those hospitals that have been maybe temporarily closed or had their bed numbers reduced. Emergency rooms are being reopened because we are able to do that. We're planning to add 1,000 workers in healthcare. That's not just a number. That is communities, Mr. Speaker. Already we're seeing the return on that. We've had over 400 applicants of people who are, you know, permanent residents from here in Saskatchewan and also across Canada who are just looking to get their certification recognized. They're here already. They're not working in their field because they haven't been able to, because it hasn't been recognized. So we're going to be fast tracking some of those. We've had over 3,000 applications from the Philippines already, Mr. Speaker. So when I hear the opposition say there's no plan or there's nothing happening, the plan is right here and it is being put into effect extremely quickly. We got over 100 new doctors coming to the province in the last 12 months. And in fact, those displaced Ukrainians that are coming to our province, they are already helping out here, Mr. Speaker. We've had 30 applications for healthcare workers, including 3 doctors, Mr. Speaker, who have come from Ukraine and are now in our province and are now going to be entering into the workforce. We're not only investing in healthcare in the human resource side of things, we're investing in infrastructure. Drive north on Albert Street right here in town, Mr. Speaker, and the Urgent Care Centre is being built. You can see it coming up each and every day. The workers are there, and that's going to be going by next summer. That's going to make a huge difference in our emergency room departments, Mr. Speaker, so that people, if you have a sprained ankle or maybe break a finger or need some stitches, you can go there and get immediate care. There's a mental health and addictions intake as well, a separate intake in there to allow for people, our most vulnerable and people who are going through tougher times, to access the care that they need in the timely fashion that they deserve. We're continuing to build schools, 15 schools in the planning and procurement stage, Mr. Speaker. We're making good on our investment in hiring 200 additional educational assistants. We're moving to a centralized online learning platform so that people in rural and remote areas can access some of those classes that they might not be able to take in their hometown. I grew up in Midale. You know, we only had so many teachers and so limited resources there that this may be a bit of a humble brag. Four of us, 3 of my classmates, we were the first kids to ever take calculus, grade 12 calculus in Midale Central School. Well, with this online learning model, kids from Midale are going to be able to access classes that they might not have normally been able to access right within their class. We're continuing to support the agriculture sector, although it was said to me today, ag looks after ag. That's kind of always the way it has been in this province. Last summer, obviously, was a little bit of a difficult time down in the Cypress Hills area and continues to see, you know, not as much moisture, but you know what? They're tough, as the member from Cypress Hills says, and ag will look after ag. But we are here to continue to invest in a burgeoning ag tech sector. When it comes to agriculture, our farmers and our producers are doing it cleaner, they're doing it better, they're reducing their emissions, they have a huge carbon sink out there, and we continue to support them. I think we're also continuing to support the Truth and Reconciliation Acts. And my good friend, Chief Cadmus Delorme, says you can't have reconciliation without truth. And we need to continue to make space for those conversations. And it was great to see Chief Delorme in here wearing a ceremonial headdress yesterday. It's a powerful statement about who we are. As I mentioned, we're not just 1905, Mr. Speaker. We date back far longer than that, and it was great to take part in the pipe ceremony again to open this session of the legislature right here in the rotunda. But we're seeing those conversations continue and making that space. The treaty signs going up on the highways near Bladworth is the one that I see the most of the time. We're investing in the gaming industry as our new online platform being operated by SIGA is coming out next week. And we continue to put those visual cues up. The Casino Regina is now flying a Métis and Treaty 4 flags permanently at their location, showing the partnership between the casinos and the gaming industry and Indigenous peoples. SAS Power is also leading the way when it comes to economic reconciliation. As we've mentioned in the speech from the throne, George Gordon First Nation and the Cowessess First Nation have entered into agreements to provide 10 megawatts of power each to the grid. Now, these investments our government is making in the people and the services of Saskatchewan can only happen with a strong economy. They only happen if we continue to grow. Hospitals, healthcare workers, schools, teachers, highways, seniors, vulnerable people needing a hand up, research and innovation, and the list goes on and on and on. These are all results of a strong economy, Mr. Speaker, providing families and the people of this province with the services that they deserve. Through difficult times in Europe and certainly around the world, we've seen commodity prices shoot up. And they have allowed for our government and our finance minister to balance a budget. 4 years ahead of schedule, in fact, Mr. Speaker. Pay down $1 billion of debt. Continue to provide small businesses continued relief by extending the 0% tax for another year. Returning money to the people of this province. But we've already been doing so much more, as we heard the finance minister say today. SGI rebates of nearly $500 a vehicle over the last 2 years. A $500 affordability check to all adults in the province. We continue to have one of the lowest utility bundles in the country. The lowest vehicle insurance, the active families benefit, grad retention program, first-time home buyers tax credit, the home renovation tax credit. This government is committed to making life more affordable each and every day. Not just when inflation is high, each and every day in this province, Mr. Speaker. The Premier recently said, we are a province of traders. We always have been. And I thought that summed up Saskatchewan pretty good. From the early days of the fur trade to providing the globe with the food, fuel, and fertilizer that we do today, Saskatchewan has what the world needs. And Mr. Speaker, the world needs more of it right now. That's why trade offices like the one in Germany are taking Saskatchewan to the world. This is our story, and it is a great story, whether it's agriculture or innovation or rare earth minerals, carbon capture, enhanced oil recovery, uranium, lithium, helium, hydrogen. Heck, we may as well wheel the entire periodic table out here, Mr. Speaker, because if it's on there, we have it here, and the world needs it. But if we're not telling this story, who is, Mr. Speaker? Are we counting on the federal government to be telling our story? I don't think so. We need to continue to reach out to these markets, and we need to continue to make those partnerships so that we can deliver what the world needs. The food. Our farmers are growing record crops. They're doing it more sustainably than virtually anywhere in the world, and this sector continues to be strong. We're attracting huge capital investments. Right here in Regina, in fact, Cargill has already broken ground on their canola crush plant. Federated Co-op and AGT and Viterra all moving ahead with plans for their crush plants. Investments in the billions, jobs in the thousands in construction, engineering, electricians. That means more people in restaurants, more people in local stores, more spouses moving to this province who could be teachers and nurses and doctors and lawyers and plumbers. More jobs for more people. The fuel, Mr. Speaker. Our province and our producers are producing more oil and gas, and they're doing it cleaner. Carbon capture technology down by Weyburn in the advanced oil recovery is a net zero company, Whitecap is. On the west side of the province, our producers have cut their methane output by 60% in just 6 years. These are things we should be proud of, Mr. Speaker. We should be telling the world. We shouldn't be relying on oil coming from overseas. The Americans should not be relying on South American oil. We have what the world needs, and once again, Mr. Speaker, we need to continue to tell that story. Our producers are headed towards our growth plans, 600,000 barrels a day. But it's not just oil and gas, Mr. Speaker. We're seeing the lithium sector, the hydrogen production, the helium industry taking off in the Southwest. Our producers are explorers, and they're exploring for the world. The fertilizer. I had the good luck to have a conversation last night with BHP once again. They are building the single largest investment in Saskatchewan's history, the largest mining company in the world with the Jansen mine. They're accelerating that plan, in fact, because they're so excited to get to work. We've already hit our growth plan target of $9 billion in potash sales a year, 7 years ahead. So as we continue to push forward, Mr. Speaker, the world wants what we have. When it comes to uranium, and I think the member from Melville Saltcoats mentioned it today, Cameco, one of the largest providers of uranium in the world, just purchased Westinghouse, who happens to make small modular reactors, Mr. Speaker. That is happening here in Saskatchewan, and as CEO Tim Gitzel referred to Saskatchewan, we could be the savior for the world. This province is truly on the edge of something spectacular, and we're charting new courses. Poised to become a global leader in rare earth elements and critical minerals, building one of North America's first rare earth processing facilities. The world wants to go green, Mr. Speaker, and they're going to need batteries to do it. Electric vehicles, wind turbines, mobile phones, LEDs, medical, defense, communications, they're all relying on these. And right now, the world is looking to China, an unstable, unreliable trading partner. When we here in Canada, we here in Saskatchewan, are going to become that reliable trading partner for the world as they look out to that. But Mr. Speaker, this is the part of the throne speech that gets me the most excited, because I believe in Saskatchewan. Because at the time that we're seeing this record investment, time after time, our growth and our potential are being stifled by our own federal government. At a time when energy and food security should be top of mind for jurisdictions, federal policies intruding into provincial jurisdiction are stalling that growth. And that needs to stop, Mr. Speaker. It is time to draw the line. It's hurting not only Saskatchewan people and families, but it truly is hurting Canada. Unlocking our true potential here in Saskatchewan in a smart and sustainable manner makes for a stronger Saskatchewan, and it certainly makes for a stronger Canada. And that is growth that works for everyone. Families define what Saskatchewan is, and whether it's a farming family from the northwest by Shellbrook or a family business in the oil field down by Estevan, it's generations of families and pioneers taking those chances, working hard, harvesting the land, building businesses, and supporting their neighbours. That's who we are, and that's what our government is committed to continuing to support and protecting those industries, keeping those jobs, and supporting our families here in this province. The 3 steps that are outlined in the speech from the throne to do this: the Saskatchewan Act, which will help defend our constitutional rights to control natural resources, amending the Saskatchewan Constitution so that we continue to retain exclusive jurisdiction over our resources, and the Saskatchewan-Canada Immigration Accord. Now, it all sounds like a lot of lawyers speak, and lots of people probably wonder, well, how does that actually affect me? The resources that we have in this province, the wealth that are generated by those investments, belong to the people of this province. The wealth that those resources provide for new schools, new hospitals, more healthcare workers, investing in our highways, investing in infrastructure products, whether it's water, sewage, getting that money out to the municipalities. All that comes from defending our resources here in Saskatchewan. And we're not asking for anything unique. We're asking for what Quebec has done around some of their language laws. And that's what standing up for Saskatchewan people looks like, and unlocking our potential. It's not about picking fights or pointing fingers. Saskatchewan isn't easy. Dreams take work, Mr. Speaker, and they take a government that is serious about serving the people of this province and not be selfie-taking social media superstars who just want to get the fame and the glory of being online. I would ask that all members of this House take a hard look at who we serve. This throne speech lays out how we stand up for the people of Saskatchewan. And you got to take a look and say, if I am not supporting this throne speech, who am I really standing up for? Am I really standing up for those families, for those kitchen tables? Our government is here, serious and investing in the people of this province, in our kids, and in our futures. Now, it was said one time by somebody that many of us would know, hope beats fear. Well, those hopes of the people of Saskatchewan are now turning into a reality. And Saskatchewan, while we may be younger than a lot of provinces, we are ready. Just watch us. Our provincial motto is, from many people's strengths, the strength of those families generations old. I leave you with this, Mr. Speaker. Ask yourself, what does it look like in 30 years in this province? What does it look like for the future and the next generations? What we do now, the actions we take, will be the Saskatchewan our kids get to raise their family in. And if we don't take that stand now, it's not going to be as bright a future. Let's leave this place, Mr. Speaker, a little better than we found it. Mr. Speaker, I'm thankful for this opportunity, and I'd like to move the following motion, which will be seconded by the member from Athabasca, that a humble address be presented to His Honour, the Lieutenant Governor. To His Honour, the Lieutenant Governor, Russ Marasti, Lieutenant Governor of the Province of Saskatchewan. May it please Your Honour, we, His Majesty's dutiful and loyal subjects, the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Saskatchewan, in session assembled, humbly thank Your Honour for His gracious speech, which Your Honour is pleased to address to us at the opening of the present session. I do so move. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
It has been moved by the member from Regina Walsh Acres, second by the member from Athabasca, that an humble address be presented to His Honour, the Lieutenant Governor, as follows. To His Honour, the Honourable Russ Marasti, the Lieutenant Governor of the Province of Saskatchewan. May it please Your Honour, we, His Majesty's dutiful and loyal subjects of the Legislative Assembly of the Province of Saskatchewan, and the session assembled, humbly thank Your Honour for the gracious speech which Your Honour has been pleased to address to us at the opening of the present session. Is the Assembly ready for the question? I recognize the member from Athabasca.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is an honour and privilege to stand here to second the throne speech. When we have a moment of true reconciliation, it should not pass us. As I sit here yesterday reflecting I see His Honor, member of Lac La Ronge Indian Band. And I sit here, First Nation member of Clearwater River Dene Nation, Denesumstina. And I reflect and think about the opportunities I've had here. And my thoughts went to the people of Athabasca. February 15th, they made a decision. And I've been here just a little bit over 8 months. And within that 8 months, Mr. Speaker, the level of engagement that I've had on behalf of the people of Athabasca, I can proudly say that I am truly representing them. Hear, hear, hear. My engagement took me to meet with Cameco. My engagement took me to meet with NextGen. And I think about the employment opportunity for the people of Athabasca and northern Saskatchewan. And we take an inventory and we say, what should this look like? The people of Athabasca, there's a moment of transition. And within that transition, I can truly say how they've been represented up until now has drastically changed. Hear, hear. In the throne speech yesterday, that throne speech spoke on recognition that continued investment into our province supports Saskatchewan first. Hear, hear. These investments will continue to grow a strong Saskatchewan for our children and grandchildren. I have to take a moment of reflection when we speak our truth of our history, and I will speak of the First Nation Métis Inuit people and what our history has shown. I think about my grandson Lincoln. My son takes him to school and brings him home. And we are so proud of him. And I think to myself, what a moment of reconciliation. My grandchildren, my children will never, ever be taken away from us again. Hear, hear, hear. Hear, hear. And those are moments we have to celebrate. We have to recognize. If not, then we find ourselves repeating the significant strides people have made up till today. I went to the powwow at Canoe Lake First Nation. When I saw the regalia, when I saw the ribbon skirts, the drum beating, what a proud moment for us First Nation people and for the community of Canoe Lake. Just down the highway is the Beauval Residential School, the Alacross School. And yet here we are with our full regalia, celebrating our culture, community, and people from all over travel to that powwow. And we see that repeated constantly throughout the province, country, and what we call Turtle Island. And I think it should never pass any of us how far we've come. Hear, hear. This government's investment in healthcare is the most ambitious plan in Canada. A new health human resource plan to address the staffing issues throughout Saskatchewan, provided by a balanced approach to a delivery of health services, by directing investments into infrastructure through partnerships with Indigenous communities. This demonstrates the government's commitment to a strong Saskatchewan for everyone. I met the chief from Atakakoop yesterday, and I've met him before. And what a proud moment of what speaks to the partnership and what we're capable when we work together. On this side of the government, that is what we do. We show our commitment and we demonstrate it, and that agreement speaks volume of how far we've come.
Hear, hear.
In my short 8 months and my level of engagement in this province, I got invited by my sister, 2 sisters, to the First Nation University Convocation banquet. And in the throne speech, the Dene Teacher Education Program was recognized that this side of the government invested in Northwest Saskatchewan. My sister graduated from that program, and it was quite a family event at this celebration. First, I want to recognize my mother. I've said this here before. My mother never went to school. And often she would say to us, I wish I had gone to school. And there are moments where things, you know, with everybody's family that stand out. And my mother would tell us a story. She would say, when I start working, I had a choice to make. And there was 10 of us in my family, so it was a big family. So she said, I had a choice. I could be on assistance, or I could go to work. Between those 2 monthly income, there was a significant gap. My mother said, on assistance, she would have been taking more home, but with employment, significant less. And she said, I took the job because I knew in the long run what it meant for our family.
Hear, hear.
And so often we would hear, not just for today, but for the future. That was a strong message in my family. So here we are at this celebration, and 2 of my sisters who got their teaching degree through Nortep and got their masters in Indigenous language. Offered at the First Nation University. And I had a 3rd sister at that same celebration who spoke as an alumni of First Nation University. And then I sat there as a representative of government. And I would be in trouble if I didn't mention my wife, because she was sitting there, who's also accomplished her master's in business administration.
Hear, hear.
So here we are, and I look around the room, and I think and I see and recognize all these families also that are sitting there proudly as we convocated social workers, convocated teachers, people with masters, and I wasn't the only one proud there. We had an entire group of people, First Nation, that knew what it meant to get an education. During my sister's address to the group there, and I was sitting on stage and listening, and she talked about our family. And she talked about getting an education and understanding and living in two worlds, basically. And that's the story she's telling about our family. And her husband, she does recognize that they still live a traditional life. They would hunt. The tie that I'm wearing today is beaded by my sister.
Here, here.
And so she's telling the story, and I'm listening, and they're gathering. She's talking about hunting, and that for a moment there, I thought of myself. And I thought, and later on when we left the event, we were talking about the speech and stuff, and I said, sister, I said, as you were talking and sharing that story of keeping up the tradition, I was thinking to myself, what went wrong with me? I've never hunted. I buy my meat from the market. But what a proud moment. And I go back to my mother. All the hardships she's gone through and everything that she's accomplished. She reads in Dene syllabics. And even that in itself, we tell her, like, that is university to us. So even though she would say, I didn't go to school, when we sat around the table with all of our accomplishments, is a true reflection of not only mine, but many First Nation communities. And I just want to shout out to all of the people that were there.
Here, here, here.
I led a career that I wore a uniform. And in my engagement with communities, people saw the uniform first before seeing who I was. So I find myself in engagements with my community. They see government first before they see who I am. And after a discussion, we break down the barriers, and what a wonderful conversation we have of where we're going in this province and what we are capable of doing once we work together. Every community visit, every engagement, people say we want to do this together. And here is an opportunity for Northwest Saskatchewan, Northern Saskatchewan, where, and I've said this many times, and I'm going to open up myself because it did come up in previous question, is the representation that we have on this side of the table for Northern Saskatchewan.
Here, here, here.
When we step up to public service work, I think about when the seat for Athabasca came open. I never thought I would be here. I ran for chief on my First Nation twice, and each time come close, but never became chief. That last election, when I left my mom's house, and we visited, and we felt sad, and we had tears, and my mother said, and my family said, there is going to be another opportunity for you somewhere. This just wasn't it right now. And I left there not knowing what that was. And when my good friend Elmer Campbell from Buffalo River First Nation, on a Saturday where I was not thinking about provincial politics at all, calls me and says, we have a seat that's open. I'm scrolling through my phone because we want somebody that would represent us. And I come across your name, and calls me and says, we want somebody to represent us, and we think you could be that person. I didn't know what to say. So I said, give me a week, I'll talk it over with my wife, and I'll call you back. Within an hour, I called him back and I said, let's do this.
Good for you.
When people see you, and all of us can speak to this, when people see you, then they know what you come into this building with. Saskatchewan is a beautiful, beautiful province. Our generosity has been shown with our efforts when we welcome people from Ukraine. When we had a pipe ceremony in this very building speaks volume of our reconciliation efforts. When we have a lieutenant governor that is First Nations giving the throne speech, what continuous moments of celebration. My engagements in the community as of recent, I talk about what our future should look like. What do we want our future to look like? I think about my little Lincoln that is in kindergarten right now. I think about my daughter who's 21 and trying to figure out exactly what it is that she wants to do and how does she want to contribute. My son graduated from nursing and is in healthcare.
Here, here.
My daughter-in-law is in healthcare. They're raising two beautiful children with everything that we've invested in this province with. They are a prime example of what we can do when we work for people of Saskatchewan.
Here, here.
The Dene Teacher Education Program was delivered on my First Nations. We graduated, I want to say 26, but I could be corrected, graduates. And those, all of them, worked locally, a few. And I think to myself, what they're giving back to the community. One of the graduates was from the family that babysat my daughter. And my wife and I, when we moved with the RCMP, she came with us. She came with us so she could help look after our kids. Oh my goodness, she was homesick. She was homesick, she couldn't do it, she went back home. And now, she is a teacher. She took her education degree at home. I know she renovated her great-grandmother's house, bought this beautiful vehicle, and she proudly teaches in her classroom. That is what we do. That is how we invest. That is how we partner. I had a conversation with the president of the First Nation University, and we are discussing how and where else could we do this in northern Saskatchewan. I had a conversation with the new CEO of Northlands of how we could advance our education with our opportunity, with all the economic growth happening in northern Saskatchewan. Despite what you might hear, Saskatchewan is a beautiful place to live now. We have positioned ourselves in the world, not just Canada, in the world of how we can contribute. My wife helped me write this speech, and she's probably watching at home as like, where are you going with this? Because that's not what I wrote.
Yeah, this could be good. Yeah.
Exactly. And which brings me to my wife, Wendy, my son, Chandler, his wife, Jen, his two children, Lincoln and Parker, my daughter, Mackenzie, Before I started this, Saturday or Sunday was when we got together for breakfast. And to Lincoln and Parker, I know Papa hasn't been there, and for months and weeks, and it is for them, their support and their commitment. My commitment to Athabasca goes beyond who I represent. It is my family. We stand for Athabasca and this province. I have one rule for my family, and this has been a rule for a long time, because I've always been in public figure. I said, whatever you do, don't embarrass me. And so when my daughter and her friends are leaving, I say, where are you going? You know the rule? And she'll say, yes, Dad, I know, not embarrass you. And you know, I think about the people of Athabasca. I think about Beauval. I think about Alacross. I think about Dory Lake. And the list goes on of all my engagements in almost every community of who I represent. And the discussions that we have, and where they want to go. And I sit there proudly, very proud, that I am representing this side of government. And my engagement is, how can we work together and do this? That's where the transitioning is happening. That's where the difference people are living. And it is such an honor that this is what they asked for. And I'm able to commit and deliver. At some point, I will get back to the Saturday morning, Sunday morning breakfast with my family. But they completely understand. Being First Nations, we are constantly being reminded of our past as we speak our truth. And rightfully so, we should speak our truth. But when we have moments of what our reconciliation would look like, let's not lose sight of that. Let's not lose sight that what our future is going to look like. Our people will never, ever experience what our history has. Never. It would be completely different. When my sister talked about her education, when I listened to my mother telling us about when she didn't go to school and everything that we've accomplished, I know my family is not the only one. It could be echoed in every community, not just mine. And that is Saskatchewan. That is this province. So when we talk about our industry, when we talk about our resources, isn't it right that we protect it for us as we contribute to the world? And it is what an opportunity for us and what that working together looks like. All of our investments, all of our partnerships. I think about the First Nation communities. I was recently in James Smith Cree First Nation. And in my policing career, I've worked in Weldon also. And when we sat with the leadership of James Smith, I was reminded about my community when we had a tragic event and the entire world responded to us. So I sit there understanding what they were going through. I was also on Chief and Council. So when I saw them, and what I took away was the strength that they have, the resiliency that they have. Humanity was tested at that time. And when we sat at the table, one of the members from James Smith said, when Premier Scott Moe attended here, he said, we will be there for you. And he said, what a way to follow through when 3 ministers, 3 MLAs, and our support staff sat at the table with them and said, how can we help? How can we help? How can we work together? What a profound moment for us, so we could do this together. I don't ever want anybody to speak to and say anything against that, because that was a true moment for all of us. And I have been there when the world responds and what it should look like. So I want to say to the people of James Smith and Weldon, as you are healing, know that the people of Saskatchewan are with you, and know that this side of the government has been committed and will continue to commit the partnership we spoke of. And we respect your request for us to be patient of how we engage that. And when you are ready, we will be here. I drove away from that meeting thinking about when the forest fires happened in Fort McMurray. I was still with the RCMP. And the amount of calls and response to the fire that the detachment has to go through was phenomenal for weeks. Members were tired. Members didn't see a light out. And then from BC, Alberta, Saskatchewan, and Manitoba, we were assembled to respond to Fort McMurray. The entire detachment was told to go look after yourself. And we came in and we took over for them. And I think about James Smith. I think about the leadership that sat with us. And they talked about the pain they're going through and how close this hit home to them. And I drove away thinking about the Fort McMurray, and I thought, I am a member of Clearwater River Dene Nation, who is a member of FSIN. And I think about the executive of FSIN, and I thought to myself, imagine, just imagine if they reached out to James Smith and said, all of the executives are chiefs, said to the leadership, go look after yourself, go look after your people, we will man your ban office, we will man your administration, go look after yourself. Those are moments I think we should recognize. When we engage on this side of the government with James Smith, they didn't know how to answer, how could we help? And I've sat there when the world responded and we couldn't say, how could we help? So as we move forward, as we continue this engagement, and as we build this relationship, we are continuously working towards safer communities on First Nations. The agreement we just signed with PAGC, I invited the Vice Chief here yesterday. Proud moment for us. We may not always get it right. We may not always have it perfect. But when we look at the communities and how we're doing things different. I don't want it to be past that when we are having moments of true partnership, true reconciliation, recognition of our truth, that it goes our future, that it doesn't go unnoticed, because we need those moments to recognize for every citizen of Saskatchewan. My vision for Athabasca and northern Saskatchewan, and how we show where we're going. I think this government is making strides in where we are going. When I met with some of the leadership, we talk about the opportunities. Sometimes we get moments that test us. And sometimes our response, our behavior, may not speak to our character well. I've had moments like that here. And I think, how can I do things differently? I had people talk to us about mental health and addictions. In one of our prayer meetings in this building, I got a call early in the morning that my nephew passed away from his battle with addiction. And just before I got elected in February, that December, I lost my brother to addictions. And my nephew, other brother, passed away from addictions. So when I am in conversation with people, when I spoke earlier about them seeing government first, I don't always carry that pain with me, because my commitment is what will our future look like. So when I'm having a conversation with people saying the government should this, we need more of this, they talk to me like I have no idea where people have been. I get challenged on residential school. I get challenged on mental health. I get challenged on addictions. I get challenged on the way people live in the North. And I will say, I'm not removed from any of that. My mother may not have gone to school or residential school, but her children did. And it has been a lifelong of rebuilding that relationship she lost when her kids were in school. Let's think about that for a moment, when we think about our relationship with our children and how things are. And that disconnect spoke volumes in First Nations that have gone through this. And I live it daily. So yes, I understand. I spoke here once of my brother that took his life. And I think about our mental health services. And I speak about, yesterday, when I was outside speaking with the people that were bringing awareness to mental health. I was speaking with this individual. The guards were up. The government should. And we had a conversation. I told my story. I listened to her story. And I could see the guards going down. And at the end of that conversation, we said, okay, let's work together. This is how we work together. This is how we're committed on this side of government. This is how we're going to do it. And they listened. And we walked away with a sense of hope, not a sense of, where am I going to go with this? When we are committed, when we have these conversations, some of them are not easy. Some of them are pretty challenging. So when we talk about Saskatchewan and putting Saskatchewan first, our economic growth and opportunity, we are talking about every citizen of Saskatchewan.
Here.
All of us. And here is an opportunity. Here's an opportunity where our language should be different. Here is an opportunity where we say to the people of Saskatchewan, this is for you. This is for all of us. And why wouldn't we protect that as we move forward? I talked a couple of, when I am engaged in communities, I went to the residential school conference in Beauval. That's where my dad went to school. And on these grounds, we're having reconciliation movements, language of making things different. And I couldn't help but think, as I listened to people, what should our story be tomorrow? What should our future look like? What should we say to the Lincolns of the world, to the young generation? We speak volumes of our truth. We speak volumes of where we've been. We speak volumes of our pain. And we speak volumes of how life is not fair. But I think about what our future should be. I think about the language for the generation ahead. When I see people in their regalia, I see them in their ribbon skirt, and I see all of this, it is a proud moment in history that we are making things right. We are making things right, and we're moving forward in a good way. And I'm just going to the last time I spoke in Dene, we had to figure out how to translate what I was saying. But I want to say to the people of Athabasca, Nen nohopaho tila jan, Nen tahasultium, Kuruhnia, Ajan nohapati yinla. Horincha ao nen dantu adeu now no hayatiu ajam ihal hiyinla. Nen no hadi hade ajan washin labenaresni. Ku ajons a hennatha, plantu atla ale do, plantu atla sehil siha. Ay kontu yatithil on kontu atla ale dadaza. Ko hijela de jan incha etleneritalu, ko he jonlin kala ditiu kont o se ti ha hers in lu kont o jones e hanathe hotel di ha hers in la nan kru di aja no pati yin la dan in the tahal tiu dan it gidu a you benriti la jan dan in no bayal ti ha dan e hayan today hanathe ho ha dan I gode babadi di no hach all new dan to earth esil tiu dan oi ai yi kont no kana tahil ye da zan la ko hi jela de dan to at anrita le kont ahala dani a abets in le ni deni danu dani de hasonal thon a athi ni deni danu kont isi ha hunt ati no panas tiu alas nalaja kont us het a kea sianas than ajanti yin lala dani sarekeu nendeg a losananil than assets at tiu kont o jandasanal team ko janti sintai dani healthy die ai alla asihul si dati adaltila jantai nick anete ai tant ube kanil new tahichare isan hontu da yelti horlun denan jantai nate ai baba hotila nani da yin lo kontuila alla asik anete ha Hok o Daniel ho Daniel in hantu au nati au danibaba nelianli. Ayi baba tlahichare arlo sanit danunda de yelti. Dana estunet in anil ya losan ayi bachanatil aik esa kont o ho anlalaja. Kont o danikanil ni hade sin aja thaban washinla. Ai amnenda na kundul iu sur ansi neno hapasa ajathi yi. Ko he jela de hanatha tahut aha. Ai a asa alau tau asa asihulsi. To the people of Athabasca, my commitment has always been that I represent you to the best of my ability. As I represent you, it is with honor and privilege that I stand here and speak for Athabasca. But it has gone beyond that. The Saskatchewan Métis Association has reached out and we have developed a strong relationship. The different First Nations across Saskatchewan, outside Northwest Saskatchewan, have reached out and building a strong relationship. It's not past anybody in this building why that is. But my commitment is to Athabasca, to Northwest Saskatchewan, and what that looks like. And our future is bright. Our future is of opportunity. The resources that is coming out of the north, not just natural resources, but the people. When we talk about healthcare shortages, in northern Saskatchewan, we offer a nursing program that you could take at home. The DTEP and the Cree Teacher Education Program on the east side of the province, we are invested in education in the north. Of the Northern Lights School Division, 11 of their schools are in my constituency. I have had lengthy discussions of what education for our young people should look like in northern Saskatchewan. Our adult education, chemical, all these opportunities in the north, our forestry. Know that when we are making decisions, that it is you in mind that we make these decisions. And it is your future, the future of Saskatchewan. I will leave you with this. There we go. Now I'm back on track. We are at a moment in this province's history that has placed us on the map in the world. Imagine that, Saskatchewan. That in this world, we have what people need. And I had to take a moment to reflect that. I had to take a moment and think how far we've come and what the people of Saskatchewan have trusted us with, and the movement that we are taking to protect that. I think is only right that we do that. Coming from First Nation community, we have been legislated to never be successful. We have legislation that governs us that says we are not to be successful. And that is not a battle with Saskatchewan. There are going to be opportunities where we move forward and what that would look like. And the strong partnerships that we've developed up to now, the strong partnerships that I have developed up to now for Northwest Saskatchewan and Northern Saskatchewan, I just want to say to the people, when I execute my duties here, it is with the best intention of your future, and I never take for granted the opportunity you afforded me to be here. And I never lose sight of that. I never lose sight of that. And, but let our future be of hope, opportunity, forgiveness, and strength, because that is the kind of people we are in Saskatchewan. All of us in Saskatchewan. And when we work in partnership and we work together, what we're able to accomplish is unfolding before our eyes. And let's not lose sight of that. People will try to remind us that that is not a way to go. But I think with extreme confidence that I say we are on the right track. Our growth is a true reflection of who we are in Saskatchewan. And we have a government that wants to protect that. And I am grateful and I am proud to be with my colleagues. And our future is of, again, hope. And that's what I leave my grandson Lincoln and my granddaughter Parker. This is what I want your future to look like. Dennis can hun leon den the cause hun de papa den hodoru sat quidant u sat linkini a cont una destrli dun zinko helu hannatede a babariti. I'll leave you with what my mother would say. It is not just for now, it is for our future. So the decisions we make is not just for today, but for the future of Saskatchewan. Thank you to the Premier for asking with this incredible honor. But I have to read the script. I'm very honored and grateful to second the motion in support of the speech from the throne. Thank you.
I recognize the member from Saskatoon Fairview.
Thank you very much, Mr. Speaker. I want to start by thanking my friends and family who do so much to support me. In particular, my partner Grayson, who will spend any day engaging and debating in the political topics of the moment. He is enthusiastic about that dialogue and is always someone I can bounce ideas off of. He hasn't fully written my speeches yet, so maybe I'll have to give him the gears for that one, Mr. Speaker. But a tremendous amount of support. I would not be able to do this work without him. And I know, like many, this has been a hard year for us at our household, and I would not have been able to get through it without him. So we always say that we rely on our spouses and our family members, but I truly mean that, and don't really have any other words to express that gratitude. I also want to thank my constituency assistant, Jason Hicks, who has been working in my office full-time, tirelessly, without complaint, and Nadia Risto, who is our casual, who has been also enthusiastic about the work in coming in to fill in whenever we need her. And then soon we will have Twyla Harris-Nasiri back from her maternity leave. She has been sadly missed, but I look forward to having her back in our office as well. I also want to thank all of the staff in our caucus office for all of the support that they provide in making us really look like we know what we're doing in this place, as well as all of my colleagues for their unwavering support, and much appreciation to the level of teamwork and camaraderie that we get to experience. It is my pleasure to reply to the speech from the throne. At the end of my comments here today, I will be moving an amendment. Spoiler, I will not be supporting this government's throne speech that recycles promises and falls short on addressing the most pressing issues facing Saskatchewan people. The Leader of the Opposition and the caucus and myself, we've been traveling the province for 4 months over the summer, and we have heard about the most pressing issues that are facing Saskatchewan people. These are access to health care, good jobs, affordability, Mr. Speaker. I want to talk a little bit about each of these pieces as they relate to how the throne speech falls short and how this government lacks vision and commitment toward that growth in the future. As it relates to health care, you know, Mr. Speaker, that it is impossible to find a family doctor today. There are no doctors, zero accepting new patients in Saskatoon. We're talking about 300,000 people that don't have access to primary care, Mr. Speaker. And the Premier hasn't yet said why he thinks that these individuals don't deserve access to primary care. Right. The Minister of Health recently spoke about this issue and thinks that walk-in clinics will fill the gap. But I'd like to ask him, when was the last time he went to a walk-in clinic and waited for access to something that could simply have been a 5-minute appointment with a family doctor? I don't think he understands the waits that are associated with walk-in clinics, or is failing to acknowledge the importance of having a family doctor within the healthcare system. As family health practices close, we continue to lose healthcare workers by the dozens to other provinces. To not spend any of the windfall revenues on our health system shows just how little vision the Sask Party has for the future of Saskatchewan. Between 2018 and 2021, there were 82 fewer family doctors in Saskatchewan. This past month, there were no family doctors in Saskatoon accepting new patients. In the birthplace of Medicare, we can chart a new path, Mr. Speaker. What's urgently needed are recruitment incentives, expanding education seats, supporting primary care facilities, working with the folks on the ground who have the solutions to these challenges. They're paying lip service when immediate action is what's needed. And we see this with their health care plan as well as it relates to retention and the lack of attention that has been paid to how we actually need to keep people around once we attract them to the healthcare workforce. We need to keep these healthcare workers around so that they can provide access to healthcare when and where we need it. Retention is a big part of the equation and the one that has been ignored by this government. This past month, we joined with the Saskatchewan Association of Nurse Practitioners to call on the government to follow through with their own 2014 promise to create a grow your own strategy, to train, recruit, and retain nurse practitioners across our province. These initiatives have been successful in BC, Manitoba, and Ontario. A healthcare staffing plan that isn't based on consultation with the experts, which are frontline healthcare workers, is one that misses the mark. The answers are out there, and this government needs to listen. We recently heard from frontline leaders in healthcare about this need and how retention has been overlooked. They argued that a soft landing is needed for new hires in the health system. According to the Saskatchewan Union of Nurses, union leaders are reminding the province that future employees will need a thriving workplace to keep them here. So far, the government's plan fails to ensure they will have a soft landing once they begin working. Nothing is being done to improve the workplace that they are going into. These comments were echoed by the president of QP 5430, arguing that this government should expand their incentive program to people currently employed in the healthcare system. What we've heard across the board is that there's no attention to retention, and we know that if you're not going to create these good jobs, if you're not going to create a good working environment, people will not stick around. Mr. Speaker, this isn't just an image issue. This is a problem with the quality of workplace that is being provided there. We have to do so much better. We know that our nurses are doing their best, but they're burned out and short-staffed. This is no fault of the healthcare workers that are in the system right now. In a recent member survey of nurses, 83% of nurses reported that their workplace is short-staffed. 83%, an overwhelming majority, Mr. Speaker. And we are in worse shape than other provinces. As we compete with other provinces for scarce healthcare workers, here's what RNs can expect in our province. 50 patients in a room for 30, 290 hours of work in a month, patients stuck in hallways, ambulances, and helicopters. We need to build a better healthcare story. I think about Jacqueline Wingeter, the young nurse who was in the paper in CBC, Saskatchewan, August 16th, and they said, quote, Sask nurse says she's burnt out only 8 months into the job. I think many of us saw this headline. She works in Saskatoon's RUH-ER, 22 years old and feeling completely defeated and burnt out, only 8 months on the job. burnout, exhaustion, overcapacity, and a nursing shortage. She said in the Maclean's article, "You don't get a break. You have to run for 12 hours straight, doing one thing after another." We have to do so much better. We need to focus on retention. And healthcare facilities and hospital beds are closed across our province. 37 in 1 month, Mr. Speaker. It's a real challenge regionally. We see as one community restores services, neighbouring communities suffer the same fate. It's systemic failure, Mr. Speaker. To call it anything else would be incorrect. It is a crisis, and instead of managing this government is pointing fingers at the federal government, even though this is a provincial responsibility. Deflect, blame, completely abdicate responsibility. It's completely unacceptable. 37 health centres shuttered in rural Saskatchewan over 1 month. We've had municipal leaders speaking out and advocating for their people, and I believe that they should have a say in how their health care is delivered in their hometowns. But instead of consulting these municipal leaders and putting in the work, this government is taking rural Saskatchewan for granted. And I think about so many challenges that have plagued rural Saskatchewan over the last year, Mr. Speaker. I think about Kendall Carlberg, a young woman who tried to give birth in Meadow Lake but was forced to have her baby in an ambulance on the side of the road that just got there in time. The Sask Party needs to address chronic disruptions to vital mother-baby services across the province. We have heard similar stories, Mr. Speaker, across the province. I think about the town of Lanigan speaking out about how this government had not responded to them 2 years after their ER was closed without consultation. People who have had to speak out publicly or come to this legislature to get any type of action or response from this government beyond a basic form letter. It is embarrassing, Mr. Speaker. We also have staff shortages with lab technicians. Staff shortages in the lab have caused disruptions for years. Medical lab techs are an important part of the healthcare team, and the Sask Party's one-off approach to managing healthcare staffing shortages is not working to fill this system-wide problem. We need to be competitive with other provinces who are experiencing the same challenges before it is too late. We need to ensure we are training and recruiting and retaining enough lab staff here. And we need to see real ambulance reform across this province, Mr. Speaker. This hits rural and urban areas differently, but it needs to happen in both spaces. There are significant offload delays in Saskatoon and Regina, where ambulances and paramedics are left waiting in emergency rooms. There are cases where there are no ambulances available. Recently, we heard of a man in Warman who had to wait 9 hours for an ambulance. This was just in August, Mr. Speaker. No one in this province should have to wait 9 hours. When you call 911, an ambulance should be available. They promised ambulance reform over 20 years ago, and we don't even have a plan, Mr. Speaker. We have a plan to make a plan. It's completely unacceptable. And I think to our surgical wait times, which are some of the absolute worst in Canada, worst for hip and knee replacements. And the Sask Party has watched this problem grow and failed to recruit necessary specialist positions to expand operating room time. We have the physical rooms, but we need the person hours. Instead, they have sat on their hands. They have let the situation get so bad that we have some of the worst rates in Canada, Mr. Speaker. And their solution is to send people out of the province, although you have to get there on your own, and privatize our surgical centres, Mr. Speaker. The approach to privatization has been incredibly short-sighted, Mr. Speaker. Surely the Premier would know that privatizing other services hasn't worked. Privatizing MRIs has not worked to lower the wait lists. His approach to utilizing private surgeries has been widely criticized. It's the same pool of professionals we would be recruiting from, and evidence shows that a two-tiered system in healthcare does not work to improve quality of care or wait times. How do they continue? How can they defend this approach, Mr. Speaker? And they've failed to follow through with their commitments to create a suicide prevention strategy when there are so many across this province who need access to mental health care. We know that this is only a problem that has gotten worse throughout the pandemic. They have failed to fund harm reduction strategies. They have failed to have a suicide prevention strategy. They're not funding the safe consumption site or the sites that exist now, Mr. Speaker. It is incredibly short-sighted, and the throne speech does not offer anything to combat our broken healthcare system. Mr. Speaker, Saskatchewan New Democrats built our healthcare system. It will take Saskatchewan New Democrats to fix it. And people are incredibly concerned about affordability as well, Mr. Speaker. People are struggling to find good mortgage-paying jobs. Families are struggling to make ends meet, and this is a crisis that this government is making worse. Instead of offering relief, the Sask Party is making life more expensive by hiking taxes and fees and raising utility rates. They hiked power bills by 8%, energy bills by 23% this summer. Meanwhile, the Minister of Finance was taking private jets to dinner in North Battleford at a cost of $8,000 to our taxpayers. Tell me you're out of touch without telling me you're out of touch, Mr. Speaker. The speech from the throne does not measure up to the fact that the challenges people are facing. In fact, it eliminates hundreds of good-paying full-time jobs through the SLGA. This is a revenue-generating Crown corporation. It has good mortgage-paying union jobs with good benefits, Mr. Speaker. The competition that exists right now drives down the price of liquor so that it is less expensive for our taxpayers that we know are already being attacked on so many fronts when it comes to affordability. Right. These are good jobs, Mr. Speaker. This is senseless. This throne speech doesn't offer any new measures to combat the generational affordability crisis despite soaring windfall revenues. While this government pats themselves on the back, thousands are leaving the province because of a lack of opportunity and the slowest full-time job growth in the country over the past decade. This government has tripled our debt to $30 billion and ran a decade of unbalanced budgets, and they're making all of us pay for their mismanagement. The only new measures in this throne speech are based on the Premier's white paper document that's been widely dismissed and mocked by economists and experts, hindering our ability to attract investment and be a credible advocate for the people of Saskatchewan. And it was designed to distract from the government's failures. Their failures on affordability, on a healthcare crisis, and on the fact that thousands of people are leaving the province because of a lack of opportunity and the slowest full-time job growth in the country over the last decade. Mr. Speaker, for these reasons and so many more, I cannot support the throne speech, which kicks recycled promises down the road, and falls short on addressing the most pressing issues facing Saskatchewan people. They've given up on helping people, they're in it for themselves, and they're making the rest of us pay the price. With that, Mr. Speaker, I will move the following amendment. That the motion be amended by adding, and that the Assembly does not support the agenda outlined in the speech from the throne because it fails to provide any new measures to address the challenges Saskatchewan people face regarding affordability, good jobs, or access to health care, and further that the Assembly has lost confidence in the government. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
The member from Saskatoon Fairview, second by the member from Regina Rosemont, motion reads that it be amended by adding that the Assembly does not support the agenda outlined in the speech from the throne because it fails to provide any new measures to address the challenges Saskatchewan people face regarding affordability, good jobs, or access to the health care, and further that the Assembly has lost confidence in the government. I recognize the member from Saskatoon Rosemont.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm cognizant of the clock here today, so I know I'll be picking up my speech, my response to the throne on Monday as well, Mr. Speaker. But it's always an honour to rise in this Assembly and speak on behalf of the good people that I represent, Mr. Speaker. The communities of Rosemont, Mount Royal, of Dieppe, and Normanview West, and Prairie View, Mr. Speaker. And it's my honour to rise to bring remarks. The circumstances that we rise here in this Assembly are on the heels of a lot of tragedy this last year. We're here for the first time since the horrible tragedy that took the lives and impacted so many families on James Smith Cree Nation and Weldon, Mr. Speaker, that impacted so many families, took loved ones from one another, Mr. Speaker, and that shook a province and our country, Mr. Speaker. We had remarks here today from both the Premier and the Leader of the Opposition on this front appropriately. So I want to just send my love and care to the leadership and all those in those communities, all those impacted. Mr. Speaker, I want to send thanks for the way all stepped up in the days to follow that tragedy, Mr. Speaker. And the leaders, of course, were rock solid, Mr. Speaker, but so were those within the community. The matriarchs, Mr. Speaker, that I had the privilege of seeing, serving the community, helping out with the basic but important things of ensuring food and food and nourishment for families and one another as they were coming together to mourn and for wakes and to remember, Mr. Speaker, but also the other networks of support that were so critical, Mr. Speaker. We also rise in this Assembly once again, and we have a speech from the throne with that horrible invasion and war still present, still occurring in Ukraine, Mr. Speaker. Ravaging lives, stealing loved ones, shaking some of the understandings that we thought had been established globally, Mr. Speaker, and watching atrocities and war crimes that are becoming, I fear, almost normalized, Mr. Speaker, on the daily news reports. But we know this is something that the world can't accept. We know this is something that shakes deeply the many Ukrainian Canadians in Saskatchewan, Mr. Speaker, the many families that have their roots directly in Ukraine, and those that have loved ones, Mr. Speaker, and family that have fled Ukraine or are dealing with the uncertainty of war and that unforgivable, brutal invasion of Putin, Mr. Speaker. So these are the circumstances, once again, that we rise in the tragedy. We've seen the horrible tragedy, of course, as well with the flooding in Pakistan, Mr. Speaker. And when we think of Saskatchewan as that draws its strengths from many peoples, this means when we see tragedy around our world like this, that there's a lot of impact, a lot of trauma for Saskatchewan people, and certainly those that I represent as well, Mr. Speaker. None of us serve here alone, Mr. Speaker. We do so with the support of our constituents, including the advice and direction and criticism and encouragement. We do so with our loved ones, Mr. Speaker, with our families. We do so with our staff teams, Mr. Speaker, and to all of those that help me and that are a part of the service in this assembly. I say thank you, Mr. Speaker. It's something that we don't do alone. And I know for certain I work with and for incredibly good people, Mr. Speaker, incredibly hard work.
This now reached the hour of adjournment. This House stands adjourned till Monday, October 31st at 1:30 p.m., which happens to be my wife's birthday as well.